With 26 of Jerry Sandusky's victims, and does so with $59.7 million. According to Penn State, they have decided to do that with these 26. There are others that they say that just didn't have either merit or they're still negotiating. The school says that they still face 6 other claims, some, to the point to where they don't think there's anything legitimately at all about it. But then again, we've had John Ziegler on before, the founder of FramingFraternal.com, and there's a lot of questions about the legitimacy of any of them and to the extent that Penn State should be financially responsible for this. John, welcome back to KDKA. Good to have you on.
Robert, always good to talk to you on a particularly bizarre day and an increasingly insane case.
Tell me what you thought when you heard the news about this settlement.
Well, the most amazing part, and I've always felt, as you know, Robert, the most interesting element of this crazy story is the media element, and I think a lot of your listeners who maybe don't care that much directly about the Penn State or Sandusky story will find this to be quite amazing. And you're probably one of the most educated talk show hosts in America on this story, and you probably know that what we learned today was almost nothing. There was no new news except for this, and this was the most important takeaway. Mm-hmm. That Penn State actually finds it in their interest to put out a press release on a Monday, by the way, the day before the Paterno family lawsuit goes in front of a judge, which I don't think is coincidental, puts out a press release essentially bragging and making sure that if there's anybody left in America or the state of Pennsylvania who doesn't believe that Penn State has yet pled guilty for crimes it had nothing to do with, we're going to make damn sure that we take another bite of the media apple on this thing, mm-hmm. and the media fell for it hook, line, and sinker. This has gotten more publicity today. As a matter of fact, it was the lead story on the CBS Evening News, which I want to get into because the details on that are flabbergasting, but it was the lead story on CBS. It's been everywhere all day, and I know this story probably as well or better than anybody in the world, and I learned nothing.
You and I had talked about a month or so ago about the expectation of these settlements being made with these particular, well, not necessarily individually listing them off particularly, but about this number of
right. We knew the
victims.
Number was 26.
Right.
We knew the number, the amount of money was going to be $60 million. The only remotely new piece of information today was that Penn State has essentially gotten to their budget of $60 million. They're $300,000 short.
Well, why do you think Penn State, when they didn't have to make this announcement, what PR advantage do you think that they are, or what PR advantage do they think they're going to get by releasing a press release on this?
Robert, that is the key question to the entire story, not just today's story. I'm talking about this entire 2-year saga. The answer to that question, if everybody in America, or at least the state of Pennsylvania, could listen to us now and understand that the fundamental, understandable premise that an average human being would have, which is that Penn State would have a self-interest in defending itself, is wrong. It's not just wrong, it's 180 degrees from reality. And what we have here, and to understand the story, this is the number one thing you have to get.
Okay.
And today proved it. You have to get that Penn State, those that are running Penn State, the current administration, they have a perverse self-interest for Penn State and the prior administration to be seen as guilty. Because if that doesn't happen, mm-hmm. they are all going to look like imbeciles for accepting guilt, putting the football team on essentially a death penalty probation, destroying the legacy of the most famous man that will ever be associated with their university, Joe Paterno, all for nothing.
Do you
so they have a huge incentive? By the way, I think they want the 3 administrators to be found guilty. They are purposely polluting the jury pool here. They could not possibly have dragged out these settlements. This has been a story at least a dozen times in the last 2.5 months.
Do you believe that it's possible that if they didn't put out a release on this, that they would then be accused of trying to cover it up, to keep it quiet, to keep it hushed?
Because here's why.
Okay.
This has been a story at least a dozen times. Here's what would have happened, Robert, in a rational world if Penn State did not have the self-interest that I just outlined.
Okay.
They would have waited. They would have waited until all of the victims have been settled. It might have been today. Today might have been that day. By the way, they would have done it on a Friday. On a Friday night, they would have said, guess what? We've come to all these settlements. Here's all the details we're going to give you. We have done what we said we were going to do. Let's move on. Let's be whole, right? In a semi-rational world, that's what would have happened. Instead, this is, and I'm not exaggerating, this is at least a dozen different days where they have piecemeal, bit by bit, drip by drip, taking more and more guilt. And Rodney Erickson, the president of Penn State, in the press release today, actually says, he references and strongly implies that these crimes occurred, quote, at Penn State. That's not true. It's just not true. And, I mean, anybody who looks at these cases one by one, and I know it's messy, I know it's icky, no one wants to do it. Believe me, the last 2 years of my life have not been a picnic, but I've devoted my life to figuring out what actually happened here, and it's nothing like what people have been told.
Okay, out of the 26, deep breath for a second. Yeah. Out of the 26 that have come forward and are being settled with, how many of them are claiming or have claimed that they have been victimized by Jerry Sandusky on campus?
Well, that is a question we don't know the answer to because these guys all of them have signed confidentiality agreements, which I think is a mistake. But here's what we do know on the record.
Okay.
On the record of the original 10 so-called victims that went to trial, there were 10 victims that went to trial. Only 8 of those happen to be real people, by the way. That's an incredibly important stat that I want to get back to because it destroys what CBS did tonight. So only 8 of those people are real people. Only 6 of those 8 came forward before Jerry Sandusky was arrested and the crap hit the proverbial fan and Penn State said, we're taking out the checkbook and we're going to make everybody whole.
Okay.
Of those original 6, not one testified that they were sexually abused on campus, and not one, and by the way, only 2 of those 6 ever even referenced sex acts. 4 of those 6 were referencing grooming acts or acts of inappropriate touching or making me feel uncomfortable. Only 2 of the original 6, I know people find this unbelievable for a case that got blown up out of proportion like this, but that is a deadlock cinch fact. Only 2, and there is not one who testified that Penn State knew anything about what Jerry Sandusky was.
All right. The 2, you said that there were 8 real people out of the 10.
Right.
What did you mean by that, and what about the other 2? What are you referring to?
This is incredibly important because the Office of the Attorney General, because they didn't like what the Mike McQueary victim said, and I have put it on our website, framingpaterno.com. We've covered the story bigger than anybody else has. The victim in that case, is victim number 2, is on record the day Joe Paterno got fired as a 24-year-old married sergeant in the Marine Corps. He said nothing happened, and Mike McQueary is lying. Now, because they didn't like that, they decided he wasn't the real victim. And so their claim is, we don't know who victim number 2 is, even though Penn State has now paid that person who is represented by the very same attorney who is representing all of the major victims, or almost all the major victims in this case. Mm-hmm. The other unknown person is the famous janitor episode, which was used by Louis Freeh to claim that there was a bad culture at Penn State.
Right.
This was an episode that, by the way, didn't have an actual witness because the witness has dementia, didn't have an actual date. In fact, the date is impossible because the janitor in question was not yet hired by Penn State. That was proven well after the Freeh report by a colleague of mine by the name of Ray Blehar. And there was no contemporaneous report of it. There's no actual victim. And yet Armin Katayan goes on CBS Evening News in the lead story tonight, and Scott Pelley very dramatically asks him, so of these 10, how many have actually made settlements with Penn State. And he says, well, 2 of them have not. And by the way, he's referencing 2 who are actual real people, victims number 1 and victims number 6, who are the 2, I think, most important victims in the case against Sandusky. They were the first 2. They're one from 1998 and the one, Aaron Fisher, who's gotten the most publicity. They have not yet settled with Penn State. He then tells Scott Pelley that the 8 others have made settlements with Penn State. And I just tweeted him. I said, Armin, could you please tell me who those other 2 are? Because according to your buddies at the Office of the Attorney General, they don't exist as people. That's quite a scoop you have there. The entire CBS report was completely full of crap. There was nothing new. They just regurgitated old interviews that Armin Katayan had done for his Showtime 60 Minutes special, and they spiked the only news out of those interviews, which was Frank Fina, the lead prosecutor in the Sandusky case, saying, and you remember this well, that Joe Paterno was not involved in a cover-up, and that there's no evidence to suggest that Joe Paterno was involved in a cover-up. And yet Armin Katayan did not go back into the archives for some odd reason in their lead story on CBS Evening News tonight to show that clip. And just the fact that CBS led with it is amazing. There was no new news. This is the same network that broke the Benghazi story on 60 Minutes last night. They have no follow-up on the ramifications of that. But here we are regurgitating a story that is basically Penn State pleading guilty to a series of crimes they had nothing to do with. Nothing. They had no.
But we've talked about. Okay, I understand what you're saying with the nothing, but we've talked about that before as well. There is no upside to Penn State fighting. I don't see it, though. Penn State going out and fighting this thing when everybody and their mother looks at Penn State as being guilty. I think it's just reasonable business decision that you do what you can to end this as quickly as possible. Why you do a press release, I'm not getting. Why it is newsworthy that they have now announced something that we had known about going back for weeks and weeks, I'm not quite getting either. John Ziegler is with us. The website is framingpaterno.com. More with John moments away. And, we are talking about the settlement that Penn State made with 26 individuals, totaling $59.7 million. Number of attorneys, actually, a couple of them, specifically attorney Matt Casey, representing 4 of the victims from the trial, and then 3 others as well. So you're looking at 7 people that he represented during the civil proceedings with awards or settlements of over $2 million apiece. Ultimately, the attorneys representing the clients are the biggest winners here. They're going to walk away with more money than these victims are. Is that not right, John?
Absolutely. I mean, it's utterly ridiculous. If people look at you mentioned the Casey law firm, Rossfeller Casey, by the way, that's brother of Senator Casey. That is the law firm that represents victim number 2, the Mike McQueary victim, which is fascinating when the story references there. I would love to be able to know, do they identify victim 2 as a victim from the trial or not from the trial? Because if he's a victim from the trial, he did not testify, okay? Yeah. And the reason why he did not testify is because the prosecution didn't like his story, because he doesn't back up Mike McQueary.
But at this point, the issue of absolute guilt and not isn't even relevant, because the criminal trial when it comes to Sandusky is over and done with, and I don't see him getting a new trial. Do you?
No, okay. Absolutely not.
And at Penn State at this point, with this settlement of $59 million, almost $60 million, I see them viewing this as a business decision. They may be going overboard and trying to fall on their sword and demonstrating it to everybody. However, there's no upside to trying to come off as though you're defending Jerry Sandusky.
Okay, and Robert, I want to make this very clear. I'm glad you revisited this issue, because we actually agree globally, but here's where I disagree, and this is what really bothers me. It is okay it's more than okay for a rational person like yourself to say, you know what, from Penn State's perspective, they're fighting a losing perception battle. Let's play the PR game, make this go away. But 2 things are really important there. Number 1, as you said, not only are they going overboard. I mean, Kim Kardashian couldn't dream of getting this much publicity for no news as what Penn State did today, okay? They're trying their best to plead guilty to crimes they did not commit. But even more important than that, I really cannot accept this circular argument which a lot of people, by the way, are making, and I'm seeing this online all over the place, that Penn State agreeing to these settlements is proof that Penn State and ergo Joe Paterno and et cetera are guilty. No, you can't. See, that's my problem here, Robert, because a lot of people most people are not going to be as smart as you and realize that, you know what, this is just a PR thing. There's no significance to it. In reality, this is a pleading guilty in public perception, and it's going to destroy any chance of these three administrators who are facing trials for their lives and their freedoms.
Yeah, but Penn State's interests and these three other individuals, completely separate interests.
Oh, it's essentially like, it's almost, since obviously, this is KDKA talk radio, a lot of politically minded people. It's almost like having an Obama administration be in charge of people from the Bush administration charged with war crimes. I mean, it's almost like that. But in public perception, it's still called Penn State. So people think Penn State is accepting guilt, so they must be guilty, right? I mean, that's a semi-rational view if you don't know the details.
Well, if you don't know civil law, then you don't. I mean, forget about the details for a moment. Just because you're willing to settle a case does not necessarily prove any kind of guilt whatsoever. My goodness, we all realize that there are civil proceedings that occur all the time and settlements that are made all the time because it's the best business move at the time, not because you're admitting that you're really at fault with what took place. I think it's also interesting to note that there are at least some of these individuals who are wanting to get money that the university has decided that there's no merit to them.
Well, there's three of those, and I've looked into the details on those, and Robert, I mean, these are so horrendous. I mean, they don't even, I mean, they wouldn't even pass the laugh test. So the standard here was not strenuous, okay? Some have tried to claim, well, that because three got thrown out, that means that Penn State must not just be throwing money at anybody. No. These three were utterly ridiculous.
Do you think that this will be the last that we'll hear about this?
No, because, and as a matter of fact, the great irony here, and I'm not a hopeful person, I'm not an optimist, I'm a pessimist, I'm a skeptic. The irony of this is that there is a chance that because of the way Penn State has done this, that we could see a situation, because they have not settled with victim number 6, and if the victim number 6 people are stupid enough to go all the way to trial with this, which they appear to be doing, then we may actually get to the real truth of this matter.
All right.
The victim 6 story is bogus.
John, I got to wrap it at that because I have to get out. But John Ziegler, my guest, the website is framingpaterno.com. John, thank you very much for your time. News and the Jim Bohannon Show next.